What if I told you that addiction isn't driven by desire, but by pain? Would you believe it? This is the unexpected truth. Addiction does not begin with pleasure. It begins with emptiness. It begins with a nervous system that has never known safety. With a soul that once screamed for connection and was met with silence. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, didn't see addiction as a weakness or a flaw. He saw it as a spiritual emergency, a desperate attempt to reconnect with something sacred, something whole, after being cut off from the true self through trauma, repression, or emotional abandonment. What we often call addiction, to alcohol, to drugs, to sex, to work, to food, to constant distraction, is rarely the real problem. It's a survival strategy, a misguided method of self-regulation, a way to soothe the unbearable tension in the body, the shame that simmers beneath the surface, the hunger for belonging that never finds a home. This is not madness. It's not failure. It's a nervous system that adapted to a world that never felt safe. The addict is not chasing ecstasy. They are chasing relief. Not from the world, but from the storm within. And in the absence of love, presence, and understanding, the mind reaches for what is available, even if it costs everything. Jung believed that behind every compulsion lies a holy impulse, a sacred yearning for reunion with the self. But when this longing is not expressed consciously, it seeps through the cracks as destruction. He called it spiritus, contra spiritum, the false spirit that imitates the true one. The substance becomes a counterfeit of the divine, and the soul, in exile, tries to come home through intoxication. Addiction, then, is not a moral failure. It is a form of grief, a form of homesickness, a hunger for what was never given, presence, acceptance, touch, safety, meaning. This video is not here to condemn you. It is not another lecture about discipline. It is a mirror, held up gently, but truthfully, so that you can begin to see what lies beneath the patterns you can't seem to break. Because when you understand addiction, not as a choice, but as a symptom, something shifts. The guilt loosens its grip. The shame begins to soften. And in its place, a new question emerges. What have I been running from? And is it finally time to stop? If that question touches something inside you, stay with me. Not to be told what to do, but to remember what you already know. Because the path out of addiction doesn't begin with willpower, it begins with truth. And the truth is this: you are not broken. You are disconnected. And reconnection, not abstinence alone, is where healing begins. If I told you that what we call addiction is not a chase for pleasure, but a cry from an unfed soul, would you believe me? In Buddhist cosmology, there exists a realm known as the hungry ghost. Picture this: beings with massive, distended stomachs and mouths too tiny to nourish them, forever starving, forever seeking, but never able to digest what they consume. Gabor Maté, a physician who spent decades with people on the very edges of survival, the addicted, the homeless, the abandoned, brought this ancient image into modern psychological language. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The addict is not greedy. The addict is starving, not for substances, but for connection, for safety, for someone to finally look them in the eye and say, "I see you. You matter." Most addicted individuals aren't chasing euphoria. They're chasing silence, a moment of, "This hunger often be," and so the hungry ghost is born. Not in some far-off hell, but right here in the child who cried and no one came. In the teenager who felt invisible at the dinner tea, Carl Jung understood this hunger as something deeper than psychology, something sacred. He knew the soul cannot serve. This is the beginning of false gods, dopamine spikes, substances, compulsions, distractions, even achievements. We reach for what's available, not because it heals, but because it numbs, because the ache has become unbearable, and silence feels like death. And if you've ever wondered why someone keeps going back to what hurts them, even when they know better, This is why. Because the deeper wound has never been addressed. Because the ghost within is still hungry. Because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. But here's the sacred pivot. If hunger is the symptom, then nourishment is the cure. Not punishment, not shame, not discipline. Nourishment, connection, presence. We begin to heal not when we tell the ghost to stop being hungry, but when we finally offer it something it's never had, compassion, witnessing, a safe place to rest. You see, the addict is not someone who lacks willpower. They are someone who was never mirrored in love, never allowed to feel and still belong, and so they became split, one part surviving, the other silently. This insight changes everything. It turns judgment into understanding. It shifts the conversation from "how do I stop" to "what has never been fed in me." And this brings us to the crossroads, because when you stop blaming yourself for the symptom, you can start listening to the signal. But this realization opens up a new question, one even more difficult than the last. If addiction is the soul reaching for the sacred, then what is this sacred thing we are truly seeking? And how did we mistake alcohol, drugs, sex, work, or endless scrolling as the way to get there? Let's go deeper. If the soul is hungry for something sacred, what happens when it feeds on the counterfeit? Carl Jung gave this hunger a name that still echoes through time: spiritus contra spiritum, the false spirit that mimics the true one. He saw addiction not merely as a behavioral pattern, but as a spiritual misfire, a misguided ritual, a substitute for transcendence. What we chase in alcohol, in drugs, in lust or luxury is not just thrill, it's revelation. Not just escape, but elevation. Think about it. Why do people return to the substance even after it ruins everything? Why does the high feel, even for a moment, like wholeness, like coming home to something they never had words for? Because it imitates the sacred, because it momentarily silences the ache, because in that instant, even if artificial, the soul stops screaming. The tragedy is not that people seek these states. The tragedy is that they don't know another way to find them. Jung understood that humans are not just psychological creatures, we are mythological ones. We long for meaning, for ecstasy, for union with something greater. And when religion fails, when culture offers nothing but productivity and consumption, the psyche still searches. It does not stop yearning, it simply redirects. But without guidance, the sacred becomes simulated. The addict's ritual replaces prayer. The shot becomes a sacrament, the bottle, a temple, the dopamine rush, a counterfeit epiphany. The body trembles, the mind escapes, the world fades, and for a moment, it feels like transcendence. But it isn't. It's only the shadow of it, the empty echo of what the soul was truly seeking. This is why so many find addiction hard to explain, even to themselves. They know it's hurting them. They know it costs them relationships, money, peace. And yet, a part of them clings to it, as if letting go would mean losing something divine. Because in a strange way, it has become their portal to the infinite. A corrupted one, yes, but still a portal. And so they spiral, not out of stupidity, not out of weakness, but out of spiritual confusion. Because no one ever taught them that the sacred is within, that they never needed the substance to feel whole, only the permission to come home to themselves. This is the heartbreak. The soul remembers what wholeness feels like, but the mind forgets the way. So how do we know we've taken the wrong road? How do we know we've worshipped a false god? It's in the aftermath, the shame, the disconnection, the moments after the high when everything collapses and the whole feels bigger than ever. That is the sign. That is the compass pointing back to the truth. This isn't sacred, it's seduction. This isn't healing, it's looping. And if you feel that, if you've been there, then you're already waking up. Because the moment you can name the counterfeit, you're ready to search for the real thing. But don't expect the shift to come through willpower. This isn't about force. This is about clarity, about seeing clearly that what you've worshipped cannot save you, and never could. And once you accept that, something stirs. Because beneath the compulsion, beneath the chase, beneath the wreckage of craving, something in you is still whole, still watching, still waiting. It's not enough to resist the false spirit. You must begin to recognize the real one. And that recognition begins in the dark, where the soul first split, where the pain first settled, where something innocent was buried and has been calling to be found. Let's listen. The greatest danger isn't what you indulge in, it's what you bury. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Nowhere is this more hauntingly true than in addiction. Because what pulls the strings isn't always the substance. It's the shadow, the part of you you were never allowed to be. Tea addiction is not born in a vacuum. It is the smoke rising from an internal fire we were never taught to tend. When a person reaches again and again for a high, for relief, for the numbing silence of oblivion, they are often trying to soothe something ancient within them. And that something is not irrational. It is the exiled part of their psyche, the orphaned self. The shadow is not evil, it's misunderstood. It holds everything you weren't allowed to express, and over time, everything you stopped acknowledging even to yourself. But the body remembers, the soul remembers. And when the mind tries to outrun it, addiction steps in like a puppet master, pulling you toward rituals of escape. This is why so many people relapse, not because they lack will, but because they lack integration. You can white-knuckle abstinence for a while, but if the shadow still rules the basement of your psyche, it will find a way to sneak out. Sometimes it won't use heroin. Sometimes it'll use work, or love, or perfectionism, or performance. But the craving, the hunger, remains. Because addiction, at its core, is not about seeking pleasure. It's about avoiding pain. And yet, the paradox, what you resist persists. What you refuse to feel grows stronger in silence. The part of you that was shamed will whisper louder. The part of you that was neglected will find a way to be seen. Ev. The ego, terrified of discomfort, labels this bad, weak, ugly. But Jung knew better. He saw that what we call bad is often just unloved, that our compulsions are not the enemy, they are the compass pointing us to where love has not yet reached. So healing doesn't begin when you say no to the drug. It begins when you say yes to the pain, yes to the sadness you silenced, yes to the rage that protected you, yes to the parts of you that had no place at the dinner table of your childhood. Yes to the feelings that never got to finish their sentence. This is what integration looks like. Not perfection, but permission. Not moral victory, but psychological wholeness. Addiction thrives in the gaps between www. It's not about fighting your cravings into submission. It's about listening to what they're trying to say. Because every addiction is a story unfinished, a feeling interrupted, a cry unanswered. And when you answer that cry, not with punishment but with presence, the grip begins to loosen. So now the question is not, how do I stop using? The real question is, can I sit with what I've been running from? Because that's where the real recovery begins. Beneath every craving, there's a voice, small, trembling, almost forgotten. Not a demon, not a weakness, but a child. A child who learned that love had conditions, that their tears were too loud, that their joy was too much, that their needs made them unlovable. So they adapted. They stayed quiet. They held it in. And somewhere along the way, they disappeared from their own life, only to resurface later, as compulsio addiction is not some alien force that hijacks you from the outside. It is the wounded child inside you still trying to get your attention, but now with urgency, with desperation, through rituals of escape that mimic care but offer no real healing. When the pain has no language, it becomes behavior, and so the inner child, still longing for safety, reaches for whatever numbs the fear, even if that comfort costs everything. Carl Jung didn't see addiction as sin or failure. He saw it as a sacred signal, a misdirected plea for wholeness. He knew what many never dare to admit, that discipline is not the medicine here. Compassion is. Because what if you didn't need to fix yourself? What if you simply needed to hear yourself? To finally listen to the young version of you who never stopped waiting for permission to cry, to rest, to say, "I'm scared," waiting to be held, not by a bottle or a pill, but by presence. You see, the addicted part of you is not childish, it is the child, and that child does not need punishment. They need reparenting, not rules, not shame, not another plan to get your life together, but the slow, patient art of being with them, of holding space for the grief they carried when no one noticed, for the anger they had to swallow just to survive. We live in a world that applauds stoicism but forgets softness, that rewards suppression but ignores sensitivity. No wonder addiction thrives in silence, in the space between what was felt and what was never allowed to be spoken. But now you know. Now you can keep trying to outrun the ache, with routines, achievements, self-judgment, or 1,000 distractions masquerading as self-improvement. Or you can pause, you can close your eyes, place a hand on your heart, and ask softly, what does the child in me need today? The answer won't come from books. It won't be measured in productivity. It may be as simple as stillness, as radical as rest, as revolutionary as weeping without apology. This is not regression. This is reclamation. Because every time you numb out, that child disappears again. And every time you turn inward, with patience, with empathy, with truth, they begin to return. Slowly, tenderly, fully. Recovery, then, is not becoming stronger. It's becoming gentler. It's learning to be the parent you never had, the protector, the comforter, the anchor. It's rewriting the story, not by erasing the pain, but by giving it a home, a name, a voice, and the beautiful paradox. When the child within finally feels safe, the craving fades. Because what you were looking for wasn't control, it was connection. And now, maybe for the first time, you're ready to begin. Not by force, not by willpower, but by the courage to meet yourself where the pain lives. And stay. Recovery is not a battle you win by discipline. It is a homecoming you allow through surrender. You don't conquer addiction, you outgrow it. And that growth is not linear. It spirals, it circles back, it pauses in grief, it moves through silence. Because the truth is, you cannot force yourself into healing. You can only re-enter the relationship with your own soul. Carl Jung, in all his piercing clarity, said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." That is the paradox of real recovery. It demands descent into the muck, into the memories, into the places you once swore you'd never return. It means sitting with what was buried, not to relive it, but to re-own it. You cannot bypass your darkness to find your light. You must pass through it, not to glorify pain, but to retrieve the parts of you that got stuck there, the parts you abandoned in the name of survival. Recovery is not measured by how long you've been clean or how many habits you've changed. It's measured by how present you are in your own life, how honestly you can sit with yourself without fleeing, how deeply you can feel without needing to numb, how gently you can hold your past without letting it rule your future. It is in the moment you stop asking, "When will I be cured?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to show me?" Because real healing doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like washing the dishes while grieving. Sometimes it looks like taking a walk instead of collapsing. Sometimes it's choosing to feel the discomfort rather than silencing it with a scroll, a shot, or a lie. You begin to build a symbolic life, a life where your rituals reflect your truth, where your days are stitched not with performance, but with meaning. You start to ask deeper questions, and your choices echo that inquiry. What nourishes my soul? What pulls me closer to the self? What aligns with who I truly am, beneath the noise? The reconnection with the self is not a dramatic event. It is quiet. It unfolds in the background of ordinary moments, when you tell the truth instead of pleasing, when you rest without guilt, when you say no, not from fear, but from clarity. These are the sacred revolutions that mark real recovery. Because in Jungian psychology, the self is not just the healed version of you, it is the totality of who you are, the shadow and the strength, the desire and the discipline, the child and the elder. And to return to the self is to weave all of these parts together, not into perfection, but into presence. So, if you find yourself slipping, stumbling, even screaming some days, it's okay. The road back to the soul is messy. But if you are listening more, judging less, if you are feeling more, numbing less, if you are asking real questions instead of giving yourself easy answers, then yes, you are recovering. Not because you're getting better, but because you are remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. And from this remembrance, the path begins to rise, not as a ladder to climb, but as roots reaching deep, until you finally feel grounded enough to rise. Wholeness is not what the world taught you to chase. It's not being fixed, not being flawless, not getting everything under control. Wholeness is the quiet, radical act of no longer abandoning yourself. It is not the opposite of addiction. It is the truth addiction once tried to scream. Because the end of this journey is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It is about becoming more you than you've ever dared to be. And sometimes that begins in the rubble, in the mess, in the softness that returns after the war within goes silent. You were never broken. You were disconnected from your truth, from your body, from your needs, from the voice inside that once whispered, "This hurts," and received no answer. So it screamed louder, in cravings, in compulsions, in chaos, until finally something cracked open. And instead of judging the pain, you started listening to it. That moment of listening, of truly listening, is when the return begins. Carl Jung didn't believe in healing as moral victory. He believed in integration. He taught that real transformation doesn't come from cutting parts of yourself away, but from weaving them together, from recognizing that even the most painful parts of your story had a role to play. Even addiction, in all its destruction, once served a purpose, to protect you from a pain you didn't yet know how to face. So no, you don't have to hate the parts of you that once coped. You don't have to despise the younger self who numbed, escaped, sabotaged, or stayed silent. You only need to welcome them back with tenderness. To sit with them as an adult who finally has the tools to feel what was once unfathomable. Because that is the real ending, not when the pain vanishes, but when it becomes meaningful. When the symptoms are no longer feared, but understood. When the behaviors you once called crazy or weak are seen for what they truly were, survival songs from a soul longing to be whole. And when that happens, even your scars begin to shine differently. They become sacred, not because they're pretty, but because they mark the places you refuse to stay asleep, the moments you chose truth over illusion, presence over performance, compassion over control. So if you've walked with this video until now, let this be your mirror. You are not here by accident. You are not healing alone, and you are not the story of your addiction. You are the awareness that is awakening beneath it. Maybe this isn't just about recovery anymore. Maybe it's about remembering. Remembering the soul that was never lost, only hidden. The self that doesn't need to prove or perform. The self that was waiting for you all along. Let this be your quiet permission to stop chasing perfection and to start reclaiming presence, to stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What part of me needs love right now?" Because in the end, the real miracle is not that you changed, it's that you returned. So stay here, stay in this process, not to become someone else, but to finally come home to yourself. And if this video stirred something real in you, share it. Not for us, but for the part of someone else that's still out there, hurting, alone, and quietly wondering if anyone understands. This isn't just a video, it's a soft revolution, a reminder. You were always whole, you just forgot for a while. Now, it's time to remember.